From the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, this is the SDM Show with your host, Rob Cairns. The SDM Show focuses on business, life, productivity, digital marketing, WordPress, and more. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. Here is Rob.
Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here. I'm the founder, CEO, and chief creator of Amazing Ideas at Stunning Digital Marketing. In this podcast, which I call the Legends of WordPress Podcasters, Take 2, I have my good friends Bob Dunn and Nathan Wrigley with me. And what we're going to talk about is lessons learned from all our podcast experience. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. This podcast is sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency that can help protect your WordPress website today. Go to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and see what we can do to help you protect your business investment. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here. And in today's podcast, I thought we'd do learned from podcasting. And I thought the best way to do it was to bring on two of my good friends. Hey, Bob Dunn, how are you today, my friend?
Well, I'm doing good. I didn't know Nathan was going to be here, but I'm cool with that. Yeah.
And Nathan Wrigley, how are you doing today, my friend?
Leaving is how I'm doing. Going. I'm leaving the show after that insult. I'm fine. I'm very good. Thank you for having me on. And we'll have words, Bobley. It's fine. I can sort this out.
Always a pleasure to have both of you. I figured we'd share some lessons and have some laughs and, better state of anything. As I posted in the tweet, give 3 podcasters the mic on one podcast. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. I haven't figured that one out yet. Let's start with Nathan because, we'll go there. You've been podcasting a long time. What's the biggest thing you've run into that you've learned to do with your podcast, Nathan?
Well, I ran into the mic one time. That was quite painful. But on a serious note, I don't know. I think for me, the thing which has proven to be most useful is getting a booking system. I used to do all of the interviews and do this sort of like email tennis backwards and forwards. And then I discovered that you could, WordPress plugins and SaaS apps where you could organize that and people could, instead of you having to go and find them, they could kind of find you and find that you had a booking system and could book onto your podcast. Am I allowed to? Can I say something else as well?
Of course, you're allowed whatever you want, my friend.
Okay, right. Well, you might as well take a seat, the pair of you. I'm off. No, the other thing is an app called Descript, which is not to everybody's taste. I think Bob's tried it, and it maybe wasn't the kind of thing that he wanted to use. But it's a Mac and Windows app, and it enables you to edit things like this, video and podcast episodes, and it's the most rapidly. What's the word? They update it basically like once or twice a week. And if you get into the rhythm of using it, then it's just an absolute time saver. It's really, really good. I won't bore you with the feature set, but it's called Descript, Descript. And it's been a revolution, saving me loads of time. Because one of the boring things about making a podcast is the editing bit, or at least I think that bit's quite boring. And it enables me to do the editing bit much, much more quickly.
Yeah, I would agree with you. The editing bit is a bit of a time suck and at times, and it takes forever to do. So anything to make that easier. And correct me if I'm wrong, Nathan, doesn't Descript have AI features built into it to make it a little easier?
So they steered away from the AI features for the longest time. In fact, they had one AI feature, which was transcription. So let's imagine a scenario where we've got this episode and there's your audio, Rob, and there's Bob's audio and there's my audio. So that's 3 files. You go into the Finder or Windows Explorer, and you drag those 3 files onto the Descript canvas, and then it immediately says, okay, name the people. So you give them names, Bob, Nathan, and Rob. And then honestly, for like an hour's audio, you wait about a minute, maybe less, and it will transcribe it, and it will bind Bob's words under his, his name, and mine under mine, and so on and so forth. And it does that. But that was the only AI feature they had for a while, because they just wanted to see how all of that bedded down. But now they're bringing them in. So, for example, you can tell it things like, find me the most 3 interesting bits of this podcast, and it's remarkably good. And then it'll find 3 sections, and then it will say to you things like, okay, do you want to turn that into another little mini podcast? And if you do, you just click a button, and it'll make 3 little snippets, and it will make audio, like little descriptions or YouTube shorts and things like that. So yeah, there's loads and loads of AI coming into it now, mostly around kind of surfacing the good content, the good bits. So for example, if I threw this episode in, it would absolutely not suggest the last 3 minutes of me talking.
And Bob, what have you learned from all this resource and podcasting you've done?
Yeah, man. Well, I was going to talk about Descript and booking too, but now I have to think of something else. No, actually, it's as weird as it sounds. I mean, all the technical stuff, everything. Too many things I can't even. I think what I've learned is that I have a heck of a lot of patience to be in this business. If you're going to do this full time, and expect the unexpected, and don't sweat the small stuff, or it'll drive you nuts. And that's a very generalized statement, which could mean a lot of things to a lot of different stuff. But it's I've learned that. I guess what I've learned mostly is where my sweet spot is with podcasting. Trying enough different podcasts and finding the one that finally hits home for me and works for me. So I think, it's there's a ton of things. I shared Auphonic with you at one point for leveling, which is really, I use that religiously. So it's a you go to the site auphonic.com, and basically you can drop in a audio and it'll level it out. You don't have to try to do it or mess with it. I mean, I know there's stuff you can do in Descript, and there's other things and various other stuff, but it's much more automatic, and it really does a great job. But yeah, I can't put one thing on really what like the biggest takeaway.
Can I ask you a question about that, Bob? So what, you drop a file in where the audio is not like a perfect match in terms of loudness or what have you?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's neat. And it just levels it all, so it's all
automates it, and shoots it out as an MP3, and and it'll show you the before and after, and you can always see, because sometimes you spend so much time trying to turn yours up, but yours is too loud. There's a point where I just say, hey, as long as everybody can hear each other and you're not blowing out somebody's ears, don't worry about it, because I can do that at the end. And you just upload the file, make sure it's kind of a very basic setting. They have a whole bunch of settings on it that you can really screw up things, but they have a leveling thing that works really, really well.
And if you want to try it out, Nathan, they actually give you 2 hours for free a month as a free account. Okay. So that's probably enough to be able to take one podcast.
The way Descript handles that is it levels it when you've finished. So you hear it all as kind of louder and quieter, but then when you click the publish button, it does that. But you don't get to hear it in the recording as you're editing it. So
no, it's like it's my final step. I've done everything else, and then no matter how much the levels, if they're extreme or not too extreme, I still run it through there, just because it compresses it and it lets you put the artwork on it and stuff. Okay. So it's a nice little app.
Thank you.
Should say website.
I would say, it's funny listening to both you, Bob, and Nathan. It's funny, the thing I've learned the most is if you do a recording with a guest and it doesn't really sound good, or it doesn't come out, you don't have to publish that recording. I think, I was thinking back the other day, in 400 episodes, I think I've only come across that twice or three times where I've actually done a recording and then looked at it after, listened to it after and said, geez, my audience won't like this. My audience won't like the take. My audience won't like the language. And I've actually gone down that road and just said, I can't publish this. And, that's your decision to make. If it doesn't resonate with what your audience is going to be, I don't think that's a good idea. Either you have any take on that? Have you gone through that where you haven't published an episode, Bob?
I don't think I have. I think there's been some pretty rough ones, and I sent it to, depending, especially what I'm doing now. And a lot of people have been, hey, I'm good to go with it. And, it's my expectations aren't quite as high as some podcasters because of the guests I bring in and the variety and where they are geographically. And, there's a lot of issues with, you can't expect them to have always a mic, or you can't expect them to have the best bandwidth. And, there's a lot of things that I excuse and I deal with. And, the script, I use the studio sound quite a bit. And, sometimes that really brutalizes it, but other times it takes out some of the background, and you can use that. And a lot of times it comes out good. I've used that quite a bit, but I've edited stuff out, big chunks of stuff. If somebody just goes off on a tangent that I don't think needs to be shared, it's not necessarily that it's boring content, but maybe if they mention a particular product and demonize it by its name, I'll just tell them afterwards I'm cutting that out because that's on my podcast. So it's there's been a few that's been questionable. I've had some very stressed people on there almost reading their answers, and I felt very bad for their, it's like you shouldn't have even attempted this. But I don't think I've ever, I've done do-overs, and most of the time that's my fault too. I'm like, I didn't push a record button halfway through.
We've all done that, or had the magical power failure in the middle of the podcast. I've had that happen too. Actually, I think I was on Nathan's show one day where my power decided to click out for like 2 minutes, like about a year ago, and I had to come back. Nathan, have you ever had to not record something? I know you do your own podcast with WP Builds. You do This Week in WordPress, which is live, and then you do some stuff for the tavern. Have you ever had to say, I'm not doing this?
I think one time I made a decision not to put a podcast out because of the content. I didn't think it fitted quite so much. And on a couple of occasions, I've gone back to people because the audio, something went wrong. The technology failed, or suddenly there was a gap in the middle, or the quality just dropped. And it is a bit of a bugbear. We've got these wonderful solutions, but none of them are perfect, and they rely on a consistent internet. So I've had to do that a couple of times. Curiously, today, a couple of those things happened. I redid a podcast episode with somebody because I recorded them on Wednesday. So today's Friday. I recorded them on Wednesday, and they wrote me an email and said, I didn't think I did a good job there. And I said, okay, I mean, I didn't get that intuition, but if you want to have another pass at it, we'll do that. So we did it again today, and it was actually much better. So I'm glad that they said that. But also today, I did another one about an hour ago, and they had a power cut. So we had to wait for their power to get restored. And I've now got the job of, I've got like lots and lots of bits of audio, because I think it ended up with 3 failures. So I've got to now piece the jigsaw puzzle together on the other side. But because of the one time when I thought that the content wasn't really aligned with what I was trying to do, I actually added a little checkbox to my booking form, which basically says something along the lines of, I'm happy to come on. I'm happy for you to use my podcast, but I also understand that just because I record it doesn't mean that it's going to be used, because I thought it might be a good idea to cover my back, just in case something went wrong there. But I think it's only happened once, But power cuts and dropouts because of the internet, that's fairly common. Like Bob says, depending on where you are in the world, it's what it is, isn't it?
It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you do a live show this week in WordPress, which we all adore. I've been on that show multiple times. It's kind of the way I like to start my Mondays, listening to that show, because it's for
I've
9
been on
a.m.
it
Eastern.
Yeah.
Just a few. Have you ever had to drop a guest off that show because of content? I don't think so.
No. That I feel really quite. I'm going to find some wood and quickly touch it, because no. Honestly, I feel privileged. I don't know. Maybe it's the community we're in. We're obviously all into WordPress, and that's the people who we are surrounding ourselves by. No, I've had nobody come on and say anything really odd or controversial or defamatory or anything, and I don't quite know why that is, but I've never had to boot anybody out. I mean, Paul Lacey, he was a stalwart on, and then he traitorously decided that he was going to leave the show, so he kind of opted himself out, and he'll never be forgiven.
Yeah, he did. Well, did you? By the way, did you see I dragged him out of retirement for one show?
Oh, good for you!
Mr. Lacey out of
great
for my 400th episode, and then he disappeared again into nowhere.
No, and in all seriousnness, we're very good friends still. And no, I've never had to sort of ban anybody, but you do run the risk, I suppose. And I actually don't know what the fallout of that would be in terms of. I have no clue about the law surrounding defamation. Would I be held responsible if somebody came on my podcast and live said something, truly horrific? I've no idea where the responsibilities would lie, but they haven't. So far.
I'm making a note of this.
Okay, good. Next time you're on. Yeah.
I see trouble coming up.
See what happens.
But I think it is a testament to the people that we're surrounded by. Sorry.
Yeah. You've had really amazing guests, and I think we can all attest to the beauty of doing all this podcasting. What we've all learned over the years is the people we've met. The journey is pretty incredible, right, Bob? Like the people you meet during the podcasts and some have become like really good friends. You two point and check, like, I'm blessed. And I was saying to somebody the other day, the best thing about podcasting is building all these amazing relationships, right, Bob?
Yeah, it's interesting because where I'm at now, with as many hosts as I have, how many of them have also built relationships with people, or they've made a connection. And a lot of times, I mean, more times than not, probably the host doesn't know the person coming on, and they start connecting. Next thing you know, they're kind of at the end saying, hey, I'll send, or I'm going to connect with you on LinkedIn. We got to talk more about this or something. So it is. And for me, it's, it's been amazing, the people I've connected with. Before Do the Woo, I had the WP Commerce Show, and that was the one that I actually screwed up and then push record. But I was talking to store owners in South America and Africa, and this one guy sold handmade shoes or something on the streets and actually used WooCommerce. So there's just, I look back and there's sometimes I'll run into somebody or I'll hear some brand and I'll think, wow, I remember it must have been back in like 2016 or something, they were on the podcast. And so it's something else. And, it's a global thing. You just never know who you're going to talk to and what you're going to learn.
Yeah. Nathan, when you agree, the relationships are like out of this world?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I'm not all that sociable. I don't mean that, in a sort of self-deprecating way. I'm not all that sociable. But on the mic thing, just being on a Zoom call or something equivalent, recording the audio, I find that whole setup really straightforward and easy to do. I couldn't stand up at a WordCamp and talk. I genuinely couldn't do it. It would terrify me. I would shake and shiver and be an absolute mess. But yes, meeting people has. I probably should have said that instead of Descript and the other things at the top. That probably is actually, now that I think about it, maybe that is the best bit, because I do an interview show. So it's me chatting to one other person. And so, I don't know, hundreds of episodes in, I've met hundreds of people. The thing which is new for me is that until really recently, I was using software which didn't have a camera. It was just doing the audio, so I didn't actually get to see the people. Whereas now I've switched over, and it's called Squadcast, the one I use, and it has a camera by default. The cameras are all switched on, and that's been really nice because I get to actually see the people. And so when I go to an event like a WordCamp or something, I can actually recognize them. Whereas previously I knew their voice, but I didn't know what they looked like. But yeah, amazing. And the panel show that we do on Monday, that's nice because it's more than me and one other person. There's typically 3 other people. And I get a little bit of feedback now and then saying that people who'd been on that show have somehow, connected and met up in the real world, or, just forged a business relationship or something like that. So that's quite nice.
Yeah. Do you publish? I can't remember. Do you publish the video from your interview show, Nathan, or just the audio at this point?
No. So the way that the Squadcast app is set up, prior to the call, you have to make a decision. Do you want to record the video and the audio, or just the audio? And I always just want the audio because I know that that's what I'm going to put out. So I could record the video, but it would just end up in the trash. So I just record. The audio and the video is just there so that we can see one another, but it never gets captured. So
and what's really nice about that is it's not putting extra bandwidth. You can still use that, but it does take more to actually record the video, obviously.
Yeah,
but to have it not recording the video, it kind of keeps it a little bit saner as far as especially people that might be struggling with their network or something.
Yeah. We're so spoilt for tools now. But when I began my podcast, I did everything as a Skype call. I don't know if you remember Skype. That was all.
That's what I did too.
And there was
I did a Skype call with you.
Well, what was that? What was that piece of software?
Ecamm.
Oh yeah, Ecamm.
Ecamm Live or Ecamm Skype or something like that.
Ecamm Live.
Yeah, and it was a little bolt-on to Skype, and it would basically capture the audio. It wouldn't well, maybe it would capture the video, but anyway, I never did that. It was always just an audio call. And then you could, you'd have to download that and put it through some sort of software. Nowadays, you're kind of spoilt for choice. For a fairly modest investment each month, something like you're using now, Rob, StreamYard. It's got video, it's got audio. You could put like a little bump in at the beginning with your promo material. You could put something in at the end, and it just all captures everything. And assuming that the internet's working on everybody's end, just does the whole lot. It's great.
Yeah, the one thing I like about StreamYard, Nathan, is it now records locally. So, I occasionally have this lousy internet connection that just hates me at times, and because it records locally, it merges it all back together, and that problem disappears. And it's just and I'm sure other platforms do that as well, but for me, that's like invaluable, to be honest with you. You're using what to record again, Bob? I forget off the top of my head.
Now, what's that? I'm sorry.
What are you using to record these days?
I'm Squadcast too.
You're Squadcast too.
I'm using, I used it, and then I moved over to Riverside for a while, and then Squadcast got better, and then Squadcast joined Descript, so you could have the two together. And it's really good. It's the other day somebody could not get their mic working for the life of them, so we ended up jumping on Zoom and doing it on there, and it's just a point where we thought we're not going to waste any more time. I'll deal with it on Zoom, and that's kind of that's one of the things is you just got to be flexible and not worry about the stuff. Just make it work and make it happen, and and it still turned out fine. The audio wasn't bad, and
podcast hosting. I know you're using Castos, Bob. You have for a long time. Nathan, are you on Castos as well? I can't remember.
Yeah, I am on Castos, although I've explored all sorts of different options recently. because I don't know if you've noticed this. There's been a real change in the landscape of hosting just data. So when I began my podcast journey, the podcast companies, the hosting companies, would always have like a limitation on the amount of downloads. So you would upload your file, and then on this package, you'd get, I don't know, 10,000 downloads. On this package, 20,000. You know, you'd pay more. But more recently, in the last year or so, companies like Cloudflare have got these packages that you only pay to put the data on it, and you can get an infinite amount of downloads for no cost. And so a lot of the companies, the newer podcast hosting companies, aren't talking about the number of downloads. They're talking about the number of episodes, because that's the only cost that they have to bear. So if you upload 30 episodes a month, it'll cost you this. If it's 10 episodes a month, it'll cost you this, because they know that there's no pricing that they have to worry about to get the podcast from the CDN or Cloudflare or whatever it may be. And so I think that whole landscape is going to get disrupted a little bit in terms of pricing, and companies that are going for the model of the download limitations, I think they're really going to struggle in a bit of a pricing war with some of these new, more competitive companies out there. It'd be interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah, and then you throw in somebody like Spotify into this mess, who Spotify bought Anchor about a year and a half ago, and when they bought Anchor, they actually turned around and said, okay, and now Spotify's in the process of rolling Anchor right into the main platform. So they've actually turned to everybody who's got an Anchor account and said, by the way, you have till, I think, May 15th is the date, to move your Anchor podcast to a Spotify account away from an Anchor account. And Anchor for podcasters, believe it or not, is still free for 90% of the basics. So there's still that option out there for people who don't want to spend money either. I know some people don't like it, but it's like using YouTube almost. Like, do you want all that bandwidth and not want to pay for it? Or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't like it. The reason I don't like it, because podcasts is like, it's an RSS feed. It grew up as an RSS feed. So you put your episode somewhere, and anybody for free can consume any of your content. Whereas it feels like the play from Spotify is more, let's get a big wall around that garden, and we'll have the podcasters on the inside creating the podcast, and then we'll only distribute it inside of our Spotify walled garden, which is obviously, there's a fee bound to that. And I think they failed at that. I think they took on some big players like Joe Rogan, but I don't think that they got the sort of traction. And you'll notice that more recently they've kind of seemed to have dropped pushing podcasting, because there was really no way of monetizing it, because it's free and it's an RSS feed. And they're now moving into audiobooks and trying to dominate that market as well. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah. And by the way, for interest's sake, with Joe Rogan, what's gone on is he actually gets more views on YouTube now that he's not Spotify exclusive than he does on Spotify. Interestingly enough, that's the latest metric.
Oh, has he come back? Is he no longer with Spotify? Oh.
No, he's still with Spotify, but not exclusive. So he's getting more views on the YouTube page. Interesting. Bob, if you had to do one thing over again when you did podcasting, what would you do?
God. What would I do?
You on the spot. Start a cat podcast? I don't know.
I don't. Honestly, it's one of those lame answers that I don't know if I would have done anything differently, because it's such a thing you got to dive into. And my first, you could say, I wish I would have maybe started with a better podcast in the beginning, the very first one. My first podcast was kind of very lame, but of course that's how you do it. You get the experience, you find out what you need to do, you take breaks, step away from it, and get back into it. Yeah, I don't think there would have been anything different. I mean, I kind of wish what I'm doing now compared to what I did before, like 2-3 years ago. I maybe wish I had done that sooner. Build kind of the channel that I'm building.
Yeah.
I really like this, but again, it might not have been the time to do it. It may not have been, how things just happen because they happen. So it's as much as I'd like to say, 3-4 years ago, it would have been cool to have this going, but
Yeah.
maybe there's a reason for it too, and
Yep.
and
Yep.
finding that, because it was something that I didn't really, that I worked on and had in my head for, probably 8 or 9 months before I really started moving on it. And now it's like, I think I've kind of hit the epitome of the level of podcasting I want to do, which is good because, it's not like I have another 50 years to be doing this or something. So
Yeah, I get that. Nathan, what would you do different?
Yeah, I think a similar answer, really, in that I don't really have any notion or intuition as to what I would have done differently. One of the things that I've often thought but never done anything about is my podcast is called WP Build. Nice little plug there, by the way. But it's got a WP at the beginning. And that therefore means that I feel that I've got to only talk about WordPress, which is fine because I actually really like talking about WordPress. But there is some part of me that thinks, what if I'd have just called it, I don't know, web builds or something like that? Would that have allowed me to go off in a bunch of different directions? So I don't really have any regret about that, because I'm very happy with how it goes. But there is just some intuition that if I'd have perhaps called it something different, maybe I would have had more scope to have different guests on or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's all I've got there.
That's interesting. I was just going to say real quick, Rob, because when I started mine, of course, I got from the outside people saying, "Are you insane naming it that?" It's like you're really tying yourself in. Well, there's ways to do that and still expand out. I mean, I'm doing it with some of the shows I'm doing right now, and you just got to find the right way to do it and the right reason you're doing it and stuff. But it's it's it is what it is.
Yeah, that's right. And some people lean into their personal thing more, don't they? So they might have a podcast which is more to do with perhaps their name or something, or just some sort of generic phrase. And I there's maybe something around that, the idea that you could go off in different directions. Like I said, as it turns out, there's no regrets. But that, if you were starting a podcast, I'd definitely go for a broader name rather than a tighter name, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and I did so when I started Do the Woo, it was in 2016, and shortly after that I made the decision to call it the WP e-commerce show because I wanted to expand out more into more e-commerce in WordPress, and I did that for like 300 episodes or so. And then I started going back to Do the Woo, and I thought, okay, so I was actually running both of them. I restarted that and running both of them for about a month or two, and I decided to close up shop on the WP e-commerce and just focus back on that because just felt like it was the time to do it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of podcasts I listen to that are not in the WordPress space, and they've got sort of really generic names. It's just a little phrase or a sentence, and then sometimes it's the phrase or the sentence with the presenter's name attached to it. With such and such a person. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to rethink, I think.
Bob show.
I would say the reason I name mine the SDM show is, frankly, I'm not pigeonholed to the WordPress space. So I've had like email marketers on. I've had people talking about journaling on. I've had all kinds of stuff that's just not WordPress, because I made that decision. I didn't want to be pigeoned to that space earlier on. So I wanted to be able to be a little flexible. It was just a call I made, and I can understand why or why not. But Bob, even though yours is called Do the Woo, you've covered stuff that's not WordPress. You have an open source show now. I mean, that's so.
And that's the thing. I when I started doing Do the Woo, it was like, sure, we had the focus on other things in WordPress because, I mean, everything plays together. And then when I broke it out into shows, I started thinking, you know, I've got the audience of WordPress people, but they don't always need to hear about Do the Woo, you know, WooCommerce, WordPress. So the open source was, I get these ideas. There's a lot of talk. People are saying, you know, it's really important if you're in WordPress to step out of the bubble, look at other open source projects. There's so many cool things going on, and some of them interplay with WordPress in ways you don't even know. And that got me thinking, well, you know, I can start something on open source, be talking about open source projects that are not WordPress strictly for the reason of introducing WordPressers to it, saying, hey, there's more than, you know, kind of, you know, break that little bubble and stick your head out. And then I'm doing the same thing in May. I'm going to be starting a show on enterprise, and that's going to be partly focused on Woo and WordPress, but then there's going to be some more generalized enterprise stuff. And that's the last one I swear I'm going to start for.
I was going to say, it's a tidal wave of shows. What the heck?
I don't believe them.
It's not our show. Don't be silly. You'll have 7 more by the end of this year. We all know it.
Yeah, we all
What's
do.
really nice though is I can pigeonhole any show I do now in one of my shows I, you know, have on board. So it's like now I've got them all pretty much covered. So if I talk about any topic that has some tinge of WordPress or WooCommerce or whatever, I have a slot to slip it in. So that makes it nice.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I love what you've done. I mean, I'm highly jealous. It's fabulous, the idea of having all these different disparate shows. We can just slot all the content. I guess maybe with that though comes a burden of managing it all. And
it's insane.
Yeah. Having, because I mean, for me, I have to put one guest in every couple of weeks or every week or so, something like that. And that's, you know, that's sometimes I get right to the wire and I haven't got anybody, and you know, but having in your case 1,800 different podcasts going on at the same time, you've got to fill all of those. But do you honor it's got to go out on a Thursday at this time, or is it just whenever the next one's done we'll put it out?
It's I give myself a 7-day turnaround. So it's like I always, if I produce something, I'm gonna have it out by that next, you know, I do it if I record on Thursday, I'm gonna have it out by that next Thursday. Sometimes they do run a little bit, you know, life gets in the way or something, or maybe I need to push it out a little bit more. But yeah, I pretty much want to flip them around fairly quick. So that's how I schedule them, with that thought that I'm gonna produce it next week and stuff. But it is it is juggling, and you've got, you know, I've been lucky. I have, I don't know how many hosts now, you know, over 20 hosts that come on regularly, and they're all, I mean, talk about meeting people. And the one interesting story is one of the shows is called All Things WordPress, WooCommerce, and I had and Monica Bovelet. She was going to do one on accessibility once a month. Well, her first guest, they were talking before they got even recording, and they were getting along. I knew him, and he's really into accessibility. And before we went live, I told him, I asked him, I said, you know, and he'd talked to me before about maybe podcasting. I said, would you like to co-host with Ann? And he's like, seriously? And so before we started, he ended up agreeing to it, and now he's going to co-host with her every month. But I mean, that's the thing with these different hosts I have. I feel like I'm a good read on people, but I've been very lucky because they take it and run with it, you know, and they love having their shows.
That's so great.
Yeah.
That's so
and that speaks of the
It's
community again, what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Rob, with relationships and stuff there, you know, they just get connected and on the roll, and they're off.
Yep. So let's jump into one last thing to kind of wrap up this whole discussion. Nathan, what if somebody was starting a podcast, what would be the 3 things you would tell them to kind of start their podcast? What advice would you give them?
Don't spend a lot of money on equipment. would be number one. You don't
Ding,
need
ding.
yeah. I mean, here we are. All of us have probably got some fairly nice equipment, but you don't need it. Like the quality of the audio is paramount, but even cheap equipment these days will produce fairly good audio. So I mean, I don't actually know the names of mics, but I know that you can get something for like $30, which will do a reasonable job. You can obviously spend much more and get a really nice mic, and you'll sound just like, you know, like some god from ancient Greece or something. But you don't need that, but you do need to invest a little bit, so maybe $30 or something, and then you can record straight to your computer. So that would be my first bit of advice. Be consistent would be my second one. In my case, I don't know why I committed to it, but it just like a weekly thing at an exact moment in time every week on a Thursday. So in my case, it's 1 p.m. My podcast comes out on a Thursday. So I have stuck to that a couple of times, a few times when I've been unwell or Christmas, those kind of things, you know, family holidays. I haven't managed that, but that's okay. But I've been consistent. I don't know if there's any benefit to that, but it kind of helped because the content just keeps rolling.
Yep.
And a third thing, there is no third thing. Those two are what I've got. I don't have a third thing, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Bob, do you have three?
I don't have three. Well, you took two of mine, so I can do one. that works. No, the spending on the equipment, you know, it's kind of just do it type of thing too. You know, my advice is, you know, if this is what you want to do, I have this analogy that I always tell, and probably people have heard this if they've heard me talk about it before. But one thing is you got to enjoy it to some extent. And my thing is, and I used to always do this in my podcasting class, I would tell people, if somebody came up to me and said, I'm starting a podcast, the first thing I'd ask them is, why are you doing it? You got to have a reason you're doing this. And if the person said, because I like my own voice and I like to listen to it, if that was a reason why they're starting it, I'm not going to question it. I'm just going to say, okay, cool. Go for your podcast. And then when I see them 3 months later, I'm going to ask them, do you still, you know, really think it's great listening to your own voice? And if they go, yeah, I love it, then I say, okay, yeah, keep going for it. But if he comes back and says, oh God, that was really stupid, you know, then maybe it's time to rethink it. So it's just, you know, you got to have something that keeps you going every week or every month or whatever your schedule is like. Ethan said that consistency, and that consistency can't be, oh God, I got to do another podcast, or why did I ever do this type of thing. So you want to have that bit of drive.
I agree. One of the things that I do, and I would say to somebody new starting out, is maybe don't put yourself in a time crunch till you get in the flow. So what I like to do is I record usually a couple of weeks out. Bob, you're 7 days. I'm probably closer to 14. And I do that on purpose because then life gets in the way, medical stuff gets in the way of, you know, and then you're not cutting that crunch. The other thing I would say is I agree, like audio is everything. Even if you're going to do video podcasts, make sure your audio is good, because if your audio is not good, people aren't going to listen to you. And that's just the reality of it. So that's kind of my two really big takeaways. And have fun. Like if you don't have fun doing it, this becomes an awful chore, right, guys? Like, you know, we all have fun doing it. And if you want to have more fun, you're in the WordPress space, call Nathan and jump on WP Builds on Monday. There's a plug too, you know.
I have a third thing. I just thought of a third thing. One of my things right at the top was get a booking system. And that's great. Get a booking system, but limit the amount of availability you have. If it turns out that your booking system is getting hammered. A little while ago, a couple of years ago, I had 9 months of podcasts recorded in advance. And, I know. And quite a few of those podcasts, it was discussions about a product, right? And if it was a more community topic where the agenda probably wouldn't have changed very much, that's fine. But if somebody's coming on and they're talking about their product, 9 months out, the stuff that they've talked about is probably really out of date. So there's another thing. If you're going to do 4 episodes a week, maybe have 2 weeks lead time or something like that, whatever's comfortable for you. But don't allow it to get to 9 months, because that's stupid. And that's what I did.
Yeah, it's that time management thing. What you were saying, it's kind of that same thing. It's it's like you and I, this is what we do. I mean, for me, this is everything I do. I don't have another business to run. I don't have, other things to do. And a lot of people are starting podcasts to either supplement something or just to build their brand. And you got to really, you got to give yourself some space and say, I'm not going to just cram this stuff out, and, take your time and, find your own so-called groove and what works for you.
Yeah, so true. Couldn't be any better said, Bob. Bob, if somebody wants to catch your podcast, what's the best way to catch the 18,000 podcasts you do?
Yeah. Well, starting with number 1, just go to dothewoo.io, and you can find them all there. You can find them all on the other platforms. Each show has its own feed. So if there's a particular show of the 12 or 13 shows I have that you prefer, or 2 of them, you don't have to have the fire hose of every show. You can actually subscribe to specific shows that I have under it.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. And Nathan, if somebody wants to catch any of the podcasts you're doing, where's the best way, and the live show, please?
Yeah. So dothewoo.io is the best link to follow.
I'll pass it on to him.
That'll be the 19th show. WPbuilds.com is the show that we do. You can subscribe over there. And if you fancy joining in on a live show, it's such, from my perspective, it's actually quite a lot of fun. We have quite a few people popping in habitually and leaving comments, and it's really nice. And that happens at a URL where all of our live things go on. It's wpbuilds.com/live, and that's 2 p.m. UK time, more or less every Monday. So that's the other place to go.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Nathan, for this. Appreciate you two very much. And catch Bob's podcast, catch Nathan's podcast. They're both in my podcast players, so add them to yours. Have a great day, everybody. Bye for now.
Thanks, Rob.
Where's the hand wave?
This show is brought to you by StunningDigitalMarketing.com, your Toronto leader in digital marketing services. Not only do we protect your WordPress website, we can help you with your site, provide social media management for your business, or even do one-on-one consulting. To find out more, go to StunningDigitalMarketing.com. A very special thank you to Nathan Wrigley and Bob Dunn for joining me on this edition of the SDM Show. Hey everybody, Rob here again. Thanks for listening to the SDM Show. It's such a pleasure to have you every week. If you want more on our agency website, go to StunningDigitalMarketing.com. We are your WordPress security experts. We'd be glad to help you out. If you want to learn more about me, Rob Cairns, go to meetrobcairns.online. From there, you can find links to everything I do on the web, as well as book time with me. So feel free. If you want to make comments about this podcast or know a guest possibly suitable for the podcast, please email us at podcast@stunningdigitalmarketing.com. Or conversely, you can go to X, formerly known as Twitter, and tweet at me at Rob Cairns. This podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much, and I love you. Please join us next week for another interesting podcast, and have a great week, everybody. Bye for now. This podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much. I love you, and I think about you every day. For more information about Stunning Digital Marketing, your digital marketing experts, go to stunningdigitalmarketing.com or go to stunningdigitalmarketing.info to find out all the great places that Rob Cairns can be found on the web.